The kids were literally babies when this truck was new. My son was 7 months old. He was the first one in the passenger seat. And they were raised in this truck and around this truck. They are the ones who named it the Big Red Truck.
Do you think he'll be successful in keeping his truck? Welcome back to Northern Perspective, ladies and gentlemen. Recently we dropped a video outlining our concerns about the recent Liberal bill, Bill C9. C9 is intended, according to the Liberals, to combat hate, to protect religion, and to protect freedom of assembly. Our perspective on it was quite different. In order to take a deeper dive into this and get the perspective of a Civil Liberties Association, we're talking with President John Carpe of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. John, welcome back to Northern Perspective.
Glad to be with you and your viewers, Ryan.
All right, so Bill C9, it was dropped last week, I believe, and it already has civil liberties organizations raising concerns due to what is in the bill. Now, it seems like the Liberals took Bill C-63 and are now parsing that out into its own individual bills, as we've kind of seen with C2. We will take a look at Bill C-8 later in the week, but in this case we're talking about Bill C-9, which is talking about hate symbols, freedom of expression, and a couple of other things. So what's been your thoughts on Bill C9 so far, and is it everything that the Liberals say it is, or is there something more concerning at work here?
This is part of a larger trend to create new laws when the old ones on the books can be enforced, and we don't need more laws. So currently already for decades we've had a prohibition on the willful promotion of hatred against an identifiable group, a group that can be identified on the basis of race, religion, sex, age, and other factors. So you can willfully promote hatred against an identifiable group if it is bankers or lawyers or politicians or people who didn't get the COVID shot. There's all kinds of groups you can promote hatred against, but just not on the basis of race, ethnicity, ancestry, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. So willful promotion of hatred is already illegal. Advocacy of genocide against an identifiable group, and again, that's based on those criteria of race and religion and sexual orientation, gender identity, et cetera, that's a criminal code offense. But now to ban certain symbols, that's just getting into the micromanagement of the details. We've seen the same thing provincially. We have in Alberta, for example, and it's in other provinces, you have bubble zone legislation that prohibits harassment, and you can't, peacefully protest around abortion clinics or around other things. It's very duplicative. It's already a criminal code offense to obstruct somebody. If somebody's walking from point A to point B, if you physically deliberately obstruct them to prevent them from going where they want to go, that's criminal already. That's mischief. That's the kind of mischief that Tamara Leach and Chris Barber have been convicted of, is interference with the lawful use and enjoyment of property. If you utter threats, that's already criminal. So I don't think we need more laws. In fact, we probably need fewer laws, but this is sort of, I think it's misguided to be layering on more laws on top of the ones that already exist.
Well, this has been the argument from the opposition in the last session, in that why don't you just enforce the laws that we have? And almost proving the point, like the timing was impeccable. There was a case just recently that we covered where in St. Thomas, Ontario, a couple had mowed a swastika into their front lawn, and the Liberals would have you believe that nothing happened, and this is why we need this legislation. Well, something did happen. The police were called, they showed up, and they arrested them. So there is existing legislation in here. Now, I think it went further than just mowing a swastika in their front lawn, because they had been known to be agitating their neighbors, and they had been known to be provoking and threatening. So I think it all ties in together, and the swastika was pretty much that last straw. But the point is there are laws in place to deal with this type of behavior, and what makes it even more concerning is they want to add, just like C63 was suggesting, the supplemental charge onto existing offenses if someone believes that this was a hate-motivated crime, which is going to be interesting to try and hear how they're going to prove that and what the test is for that. So, bottom line is you can end up serving a life sentence for a hate crime if the justice system decides that that's what happened. Is this type of layering on a problem? Shouldn't we just let the existing judges do what they're already doing, which is add conditional sentencing on based on any aggravating factors?
I think sentencing is the right place to deal with hate if hate exists. So, for example, if somebody has robbed a convenience store at night, walked in there with a gun or a knife or a baseball bat and said, give me all your money or else I'm going to kill you, I'm going to hurt you. If there's compelling evidence that emerges that this was motivated not just by the greed of wanting to get money that's not yours, that you haven't worked for, that you haven't earned, if it's not just greed, but that the criminal actually targeted that convenience store because they didn't like the Somali or Korean or East Indian ethnicity of the clerk, if there's evidence of that, the judge already has a lot of latitude on sentencing, and there's a long list of aggravating factors that the judge can use to impose a harsher sentence. There's mitigating factors, remorse, guilty plea, whatever. There's and hate can be an aggravating factor. So, if the person convicted of robbing the convenience store, if he had uttered a lot of racial slurs and
on
not
camera, like who knows?
And then the judge can say, this is particularly egregious because you're full of hate for the Somali, Korean, East Indian, whatever clerk that you robbed. So there's latitude there already, but hate is an emotion, and we shouldn't be criminalizing emotions ever. It's not. That's dangerous because then the state's trying to penetrate into hearts and minds. A side point on the swastika, I have seen houses in Canada, in Calgary in particular, where I live, where there's East Indian immigrants, and they have a small swastika carved into maybe the wood above their door. It is an ancient Sanskrit symbol for prosperity. I had the good fortune of visiting Japan once, and their temples, they have swastikas. They're in the opposite direction of the Nazi swastika used by the Germans in the 1930s, but it's a swastika. It's an ancient religious symbol, and so in Japan you see the swastikas on a map denote temples. So we have to be very cautious there as well. We can't always assume categorically that a swastika is a hate symbol per se.
Well, and we brought up this point. What if someone decides that, the Northern Perspective logo was a symbol for hate? What happens if they do that? Does that mean that, we would no longer be able to use that as our brand symbol, and we would have to change something? And this is this is where this type of thing leads, right?
The other thing I found disconcerting when I heard the minister's announcement on the radio, and he talked about rising anti-Semitism, rising Islamophobia, and said nothing about the burning of churches. And I think it was horrible that in 2017 there was the mosque in Quebec City, and a shooter went in there, murdered people in cold blood, shot, I don't remember, 6, 9, 11, 12 people to death. Horrible, probably motivated by hatred of Islam. I don't recall the details. You've got vandalism of synagogues, which presumably is motivated by hatred of Jews. It's not just random graffiti. The 21, I don't even know the number actually, but no, in 2021, dozens of churches set on fire, burned to the ground. Minister makes no mention of that. Look, either mention them all or don't mention any of them. I think it's a disgrace to mention only synagogues and mosques and then say nothing about churches at all. So it's but fundamentally, the government should just crack down on crime, and if there was hatred there, that's something that the judge can consider when sentencing somebody who's been found guilty.
Well, let's talk about hatred. Let's talk about how they have wanted to actually define it, because they tried to define it, and you can see here where it says hatred means the emotion that involves detestation or vilification, and that is stronger than disdain or dislike. So when I saw that, John, I just shook my head, because to me, all they're doing is they are taking a subjective term and then they're trying to further define it by adding other subjective terms. So, okay, so you're saying, oh, well, hate means to detest. Well, what does that mean to somebody? What does vilification mean to somebody? So this isn't to me a definition that would be able to have any kind of legal test applied to it. Of course, you can talk about racism, because racism, that's at least more empirically proven. When you're talking about certain things, like as you said before, maybe someone is uttering racial slurs and making specific threats and things like that. But how do you then jump from something that you can kind of empirically prove to something that is very subjective?
It's also that we should be focused on behavior, right? There could be, let's say that there's somebody who hates a particular ethnic group, but if you're not beating up those people or robbing them or setting their houses on fire, really, just for the state to try to get into the hearts and minds of people. The other thing that's interesting about this definition of hatred is I have yet to see it defined clearly. Are we talking about hatred as it exists in the heart of the person who is saying the words or committing the deeds, carrying out the misconduct? Or is it hatred as heard by the people? Because people will, what somebody says and what somebody else hears can be radically different. There's a book by that title. I think the title is it's not what you say, it's what people hear. And you can say things which in your own mind are just incredibly rational and reasonable and common sense and wisdom, and to somebody else they sound like pure evil and hatred. And a lot of these, I've been looking at these provisions for a very long time, different provisions in the criminal code and human rights legislation, and they often don't distinguish between hate as perceived by the listener, or is there actually hate in the heart of the speaker. It's very hard. In the ears of the listener, it's very subjective. In the heart of the speaker, there are people, you take a Bill Whatcott, for example, and he's self-described Bible-believing Christian, and gay sex is sinful, and he denounces gay sex in language that other people find very offensive. He would tell you that he has no hatred in his heart whatsoever. He loves gay people. He wants to help them out and save them from going to hell. And he wants them to not catch certain diseases that you could catch. But listeners, many people, they feel that feel is the right word. They feel that his speech is hateful. It's just impossible to get to clarity, and laws ought to have clarity. In order for a law to be a just law, it needs to be clear. And here, what gets into detestation and vilification is pretty unclear. A vociferous critic of current Aboriginal policies, that could easily lead to charges of hate speech. If somebody said that our current constitution is racist and we should just embrace the equality of all Canadians regardless of ancestry, somebody could say, well, that's hateful because you're against special rights for Aboriginals, so it's hateful.
What if you hate Nazis?
Well, hate is a good thing when directed against evil and injustice, and that's another thing. Hate is like a weather vane, right? Which way is the wind blowing? That's the way that the weather vane's going to go. So if you hate what is evil, then in that context, hatred is a very good thing.
But this is where it comes back to, according to this law, if you even hate evil things, that could be a hate crime. But then it comes down to, okay, well, we will put into the law that you're only allowed to hate what is evil. Well, what is evil? Well, it's what I think is not to my to my good. So it's problematic in that regard. But this is where we interpreted all of this to go down the 1984 George Orwell road of thought crime, where the state gets to decide what you meant, and the state gets to decide what you thought, and if what you were thinking is not in line with what the state wants, then they get to charge you and potentially decide to convict you based on what you, or not what you thought and not what your intentions were, but what the state decides that your intentions were. And this is the big problem when it comes back to this convenience store thing. So, sure, this person came in, threatened somebody, stole a chocolate bar, didn't hurt the person, but said some racial slurs. Okay, well, so they were convicted of shoplifting, but now they may have potentially a 2-year sentence of hate crime on top of that, maybe 6-month misdemeanor of shoplifting because of something they said. Like this is the silliness that this goes down, and more than silliness, it's concerning because you were criminalizing potentially unstated intent.
Yeah, the laws are strong. If somebody spray paints swastika onto a synagogue or some other slogan, or somebody tries to set fire to a synagogue, the laws are there. You can really throw the book at that person, right? The potential penalty for vandalism is high, depending on how much vandalism you do, how much damage you cause. How much does it cost to repaint the wall? Arson as well, and a lot of these have potentially many criminal code offenses will say, it can be a fine or it can be imprisonment up to 5 years, right? Or it can be imprisonment up to 10 years. Those penalties are rarely carried out to that extent, but they're in the criminal code. They're there. So an extreme case of arson, an extreme case of vandalism, there's prison time. But no, it's scary when the state tries to start discerning emotions and dealing with. I mean, hate is real, but it's very hard to define. right? It's like love is real as well, right? You can't measure it in grams or centimeters or in any other way, right? So yeah, we don't need more laws in Canada. We just need, in many cases, we need better enforcement of existing laws and equal enforcement. This is a big problem, right? We have this breakdown in the rule of law where if you are protesting for what the authorities deem to be the correct cause, then you can get away with committing a crime in broad daylight. But then you have people like Tamara Leach and Chris Barber who are protesting for what the authorities and the establishment deem to be the incorrect cause. And we've had over $21 million spent, according to a Western Standard report very recently, story in the Western Standard, over $21 million spent on prosecuting people over peacefully protesting. And I believe, sadly, these people would never have been prosecuted if they were marching in the streets to promote their belief that mankind controls the weather, that people control climate. If they'd been on that shtick, or LGBTQ or Aboriginal rights, I doubt that they would have been
Yeah, or ironically, if they'd been violent criminals, they probably would have been out on bail, and then the Jordan law would have taken care of that. So, and then here we are. But peacefully protesting, that's something that we can't allow them to do. And that dovetails nicely into the case of Chris Barber, where, as we all know, he was convicted on his mischief charge, and the government wants to seize his big rig, known as Big Red, and it's almost become a symbol of the Freedom Convoy. And their argument is that this was the tool in the mischief that allowed it to happen in the first place. I know the JCCF is involved in this. What's going on with this, John?
Well, in terms of the truck, Chris Barber, like so many other truckers in Ottawa 3.5 years ago in January, February of 2022, they followed police instructions in terms of where they parked their vehicles. Chris Barber consistently, he was in touch with police, if not directly himself. Then the Justice Centre had lawyers on the ground in Ottawa. So he was continually getting advice from lawyers and from law enforcement. And I don't think anybody seriously disputes that some of the trucks or many of them were parked illegally in the sense of contravening municipal parking regulations. But it's complicated when the police tell you where to park. He was told at one point to park his truck on Wellington Street. He did so. He was ordered to move it, and he agreed to do that. He didn't do it immediately at that moment because it wasn't safe because of situation or circumstance. He moved it later. So this is a very aggressive and malicious move to suggest, and there are provisions in the criminal code where what you used to commit the crime can be confiscated, right? So, and that's not an unjust law, but in this particular situation, the Crown's trying to frame this like this truck was used for criminal activity, when in fact, at worst, there should be a parking ticket, and even that is mitigated when you are following the directions of police. So,
and he moved that on February 8th, and he moved it away from the downtown core, and it didn't return, right? It wasn't around for a good portion of the actual convoy protest, and it wasn't there when the police order to remove everybody out on that fateful day happened either, was it?
Yeah. It's a very aggressive fixation that this is the provincial government, Ontario-funded Crown prosecutors who have publicly complained about a lack of resources. And so you've got people accused of rape and murder who their case is not going to trial because 30 months have elapsed. And we've got the Supreme Court of Canada ruling in Jordan that a serious crime, murder, sexual assault, aggravated assault, serious crime, has to be tried within 30 months. And if no trial takes place, then the Crown will stay the charges, meaning basically the accused person walks away scot-free. Bearing in mind that some of these accused people, might be innocent as well, but there's just no trial. And so we've had people accused of murder and manslaughter that have walked away scot-free, and the Crown says, well, we don't have the resources to bring them to court. We can't get a trial within 30 months, within 2.5 years. So, but yet they have put huge amounts of resources into prosecuting Tamara Leach and Chris Barber and other people. There's Jeff Evely. There are Harold Jonker. I mean, on and on and on. Justice Centre has provided funding for lawyers for many of these people accused of crimes. We've had a very high success rate of people getting acquitted after trial or negotiated agreement, and the accused person donates $100 to charity, and the Crown stays the charges. So it's just unfortunate that the Crown is politically fixated on this because they didn't like the cause. If it was a dark-skinned Aboriginal Muslim lesbian protesting about climate change, I don't think the Crown would be responding the same way.
Do you think he'll be successful in keeping his truck?
I hope so. He's a hardworking guy, law-abiding, convicted of mischief in relation to a peaceful protest, but he has no criminal record, family man, hard worker, hailed as one of the heroes in 2020. We were applauding all of our truckers for being the frontline people in the face of COVID that were seeing to it that our grocery stores kept on getting food, and we really do depend on truckers for so much that is important. And then truckers say no to needing to be injected when they're the sole person in their cab, or they're the sole person driving the truck, and as if there's some medical scientific reason why they need to get injected, and suddenly they become demonized by the establishment, and that's very sad to see.
Well, we're really hopeful that he does get to keep his truck, because even though it's a 2004 model, these trucks don't age like other vehicles. It's still worth around $150,000 from what I saw, and there's a video posted on the JCCF website that it's rather an emotional one, where Chris is giving a tour of Big Red, and he talks about the fact that his kids, spent some of their first months in the truck, and talks about his daughters coming on rides with him, and it's really emotional in that, like he says, this was my home. So it's something that, even if you don't agree with the perspective of the truckers, and you don't agree with their thoughts on the convoy, to take away someone's livelihood and to take away, as he said, someone's home and something with so much history based off of a mischief charge and protesting when the truck wasn't even there for a good portion of the protest in Ottawa. I think you're right. It comes down to just malicious.
Well, this is what we've descended into in Canada. We saw another example of non-law enforcement in Winnipeg in 2021, when some Aboriginal protesters tore down and vandalized a large statue of Queen Victoria that was at the legislature grounds. Queen Victoria was the reigning monarch when the residential schools in Canada were, residential schools for Aboriginals were established under her reign. And of course, there is debate in this country. People would try to kill the debate about people that are grateful for their experience with the residential schools because they learned English and they were able to move into and take advantage of opportunities in the economy, which if they had remained illiterate and unable to speak English, they wouldn't have had those opportunities. I know one Aboriginal lawyer in Alberta who has researched this extensively and says that in the vast majority of cases, it was the parents who wanted their kids to attend these residential schools. I haven't had the time to look into that one way or the other, but there's debate about all of this. And I support the right of Aboriginals to protest or anybody else to advocate their viewpoint that, if you want to say that the residential schools were pure evil, there's nothing good about them, it was an attempt to genocide. You say whatever you want to say. I support free speech. But you don't have a right to vandalize public property. If you don't want a statue of Queen Victoria at the legislature grounds, there are procedures. You can contact your MLA. I'm sure that there is some committee that is in charge, or some person that is in charge of which statues are displayed on the legislature grounds. You can petition to have that statue removed. There's democratic legal means to get rid of any statue that you want and to add any statue, right? But we can't have this breakdown in the rule of law where you feel really angry, you feel so justified in what you're doing that you can just tear down a statue of some historical figure that you dislike. Yet in broad daylight, these protesters tore down a statue of Queen Victoria. It was sitting on a piece of marble that was maybe 6 feet above the ground. They tore it down, vandalized it in broad daylight. Police were watching a crime in progress, did nothing. Crown prosecutors in Manitoba later announced that nobody would be prosecuted for this. So it was nakedly political. The authorities are saying, if you're protesting for the right cause, you can commit a crime in broad daylight. We saw it in March of 2020 at the same time that around the same time that lockdowns were coming down, you had these protesters on environmental Aboriginal issues were shutting down roadways, which is criminal conduct. And they can get away with that because Trudeau and now that he's gone, you've got people in places of power that are sympathetic to the cause of Aboriginal rights, trying to save the planet from the impending climate holocaust. People who are sympathetic to that, they're not going to throw the book at protesters. This is totally wrong. This is a breakdown in the rule of law. You either you throw the book at all of them equally, or if you want to take a really hands-off approach, then you do that for everybody. But here you have a selective throwing the book at Chris and Tamara, and then taking a very light-handed approach towards people advocating for different causes.
For sure, and for those interested, we're going to show you now the video of Chris and the tour, because I think a lot of people would benefit from seeing it. And just as you're watching, as you're listening, just listen to the emotion in Chris's voice as he's talking about this, because he's not just talking about a truck. He's talking about a member of his family, by all accounts, in how he's speaking about it. So, but before we get to that, John, thanks for chatting with us today, and we look forward to seeing a hopeful decision on Chris and being able to maintain ownership of Big Red for himself and his family.
I'm hoping for good news on October 7th. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. It's Chris Barber here. I would like to take everybody for a little tour on my 2004 W900 Kenworth, the iconic Big Red. As most people know, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms has been assisting us with this fight right from the start. And I'm just reaching out to show everybody a little ins and outs of the truck that we were fighting for so hard right now in the courts. is definitely the Crown is trying to forfeit this truck and then destroy it because of its symbolic measure. Let's take you up inside the cab. The seats are a little wore out. It is it's been my home for the better part of 22 years. I'd like to show you the collar of the dog Buddy that I had put down in this passenger seat, and I believe it was 2014. The dog traveled with me for the better part of 17 years. This truck has been my life and my family's life for as long as I can remember. We actually have the bunk bed in the back right now down because my daughter's been helping me and piloting with me. So in the evenings we save our hotel costs by her just sleeping up here and I sleep down on the bottom. The kids were literally babies when this truck was new. My son was 7 months old. He was the first one in the passenger seat. And they were raised in this truck and around this truck. They are the ones who named it the Big Red Truck. And then that name stuck from there. And iconically, it's a piece of history. And the Crown wants to destroy that because of that. So I just wanted to jump on here and do a little video for everyone, just explaining how important this fight is right now for Canadians and myself and my family. And it's because of support from people from the Justice Center right now that allows us to continue this fight. So prayers, and we appreciate the support so greatly. The Justice Center has been basically there from day one. They flew lawyers in to assist us in this in Ottawa in February of 2022, and they continue to stand with us today, thanks to many of the people on staff there as well as John Carpace. So we appreciate the support, and we really appreciate it. And this fight is far from over, and we are determined and we are steadfast, and we're going to see this through the end no matter what. So again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all the help over the last number of years. It's been greatly appreciated from my family to yours. Thank you.